Alhamdulillah, we thank and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of His blessings that He has bestowed upon us. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the blessing of Islam. Wa kafa biha ni'mah. It is sufficient as a blessing. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for affording us the opportunity to spend a few moments in a house of the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this blessed month of Ramadan, and then in this most auspicious last 10 days of the month of Ramadan, whilst the bulk of us are in i'tikaf. For those of us who are perhaps moving between masajid, not to forget that when we enter into the masjid, particularly in these last 10 days, to make the intention of i'tikaf, nawaitul i'tikaf ma dumtu fil masjid. I intend i'tikaf for as long as I'm in the masjid. One virtue thereof, I don't know if it was mentioned before, that some of the scholars, I haven't read it, but I've heard from our scholars, that if a person is too lazy to consciously seek Allah's forgiveness, then he should find himself in a house of the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because for as long as he is in the masjid, the angels seek forgiveness on his behalf. So, just with the intention of i'tikaf and just finding yourself in the masjid, you gain this great virtue of the angels seeking forgiveness on your behalf. And we thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for affording us the opportunity to come to a gathering of learning, whereby we seek to learn that knowledge which will guide us to and guide us along the straight path, inshallah. There's an explanation of the hadith which goes, إِذَا مَرَرْتُمْ بِرِيَاضِ الْجِنَانِ فَارْتَعُوا. When you pass by the gardens of bliss, then grace to your heart's content. So the Prophet ﷺ was asked, وَمَا هِيَ رِيَاضُ الْجِنَانِ? What are the gardens of bliss? He says, حِلَقُ الذِّكْر. The gatherings of remembrance. And then Ata ibn Abi Rabah, he gives an explanation. He says, it is those gatherings in which you learn how to buy and sell, in which you learn fiqh. In other words, the laws of Allah SWT that apply to your life. So alhamdulillah, we're indeed fortunate that we find ourselves in a garden of the gardens of bliss, with the idea of acquiring sacred knowledge. So we continue with our reading bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes us to benefit through the words of the author. من كتاب فتح الوهاب المالك في حل ألفاظ عمدة السالك وعدة الناسك تأليف طه ابن عبد الحميد بن محمد حمادي إلى أن قال. So we were talking about divorce of a minor and divorce of a mad person, an insane person. A minor and an insane person doesn't have contractual capacity. So in other words, what they do and what they say doesn't have a legal effect. So if a mad person divorces his wife, the divorce doesn't fall, as we explained yesterday. Likewise, according to the Shafi school of thought, a minor, a person who hasn't reached adulthood, is not baligh, a minor, he doesn't have contractual capacity. So if he divorces his wife, the divorce is not going to fall. What is the basis for that? So firstly, لا تنجيزا ولا تعليقا. We're going to come to learn that there's two ways of issuing a divorce. The one way is consummate. When a person says to his wife, Anti talikun, you are divorced, the divorce falls immediately. Another way is what they refer to in Arabic as ta'liqan. The person can pin the divorce. For example, a husband says to the wife, In dakhalti ad-dar fa anti talikun, or in kharajti min ad-dar fa anti talikun. If you exit from the house, then you are divorced. So that's a pending divorce. Now, a mad person and a child, irrespective of what type of divorce we are talking about, pending or consummate, it doesn't matter, it's inconsequential. He doesn't have the capacity to issue a divorce. Now, why? لأن عبارتهما غير معتبرة, because their expressions, their utterances are not considered to be valid. The utterances are not considered to be valid. والقلم مرفوع عنهما فلا يلزمهما حكم. And importantly, the pen has been raised from the actions. In other words, they are not morally responsible. They are not duty bound. They're not duty bound. Yes, certain actions will have an impact, of course, but that's not because they're morally responsible. That is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has tied one law into the other law. And I think perhaps this is an important thing to discuss. A minor is not morally responsible, he's not duty bound. What does not duty bound mean? That he doesn't have to pray. You and I as adults, we are morally responsible, we are duty bound. So the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relates to us. So you have to pray, you have to fast, You have to perform the pilgrimage. You have to pay your alms tax, etc., etc., etc. But a minor, a youngster, is not morally responsible. He's not duty bound. Nothing is compulsory upon him. But now what happens is you might think a youngster comes, and he basically grabs hold of the camera and he flings the camera to the ground and the camera breaks. So we said now a moment ago he's not duty bound, not morally responsible. But is he responsible for having to pay for the camera which he broke? Yes, he is. No? But that's not because of the fact that he's morally responsible. That's because Allah SWT, certain laws of Allah connect one thing to another thing. So when you destroy something, then the law connected to that is that you are responsible for replacing it, irrespective of what your status quo may be. So we shouldn't, conflate between the two. That is morally responsible means that, he's lets off the hook for everything. It doesn't work like that. Now, وفي الترمذي موقوفا كل طلاق جائز إلا طلاق المعتوه. There's a hadith in Tirmidhi, موقوفا, which means it's attributed to a companion. In other words, it's not raised to the Prophet ﷺ that the Prophet ﷺ said it, but a companion said it. And what does he say? That every type of divorce is permissible. In other words, it will be enacted. It will have an effect, except for the divorce of a ma'atu. Ma'atu is basically another word for a person who doesn't have the capacity, contractual capacity. If you don't have contractual capacity, your divorce doesn't fall. وكذلك الحكم في كل زائل العقل لكن قد يتصور طلاق النائم والمغمى عليه والمجنون فيما إذا علق طلاقها في حال التكليف بصفة فوجدت وهو غير مكلف. So now our scholars, you find the jurists, they go to mention certain things, and it's nice to go through it somewhat anecdotally. Wallahu a'lam, Allah knows best. So we said now that a mad person and a child, or a mad person in particular, the divorce doesn't fall. But they create a scenario where you have a mad person and his divorce does actually fall. But they just really play around with the construct. So what do they say? A person by his complete senses, he says to his wife, if you exit from the house, then you are divorced. So he issues a pending divorce. If you exit from the house, then you're divorced. So then when she exits, he happens at that point in time to find himself insane. Then does the divorce fall? Then they say the divorce falls. Why? Because he pended on the exiting and the lady exited, and therefore the divorce falls. But if you want to be technical, technically speaking, he didn't issue the divorce whilst he was mad. He issued it whilst he was sane, and then he pended on her exiting, and her exiting was found when he was insane. So, it's really a play with words if you look at it. But they construe this as an example of the divorce of an insane person actually occurring. But technical in that particular regard. Now, Bismillah. Yes, absolutely. So, look, at the end of the day, the prerogative, and we have already discussed that أبغض الحلال إلى الله الطلاق. The most detested of that which is permissible by Allah is divorce. So divorce is not something which a male person should willy-nilly exercise. Right? But having said that, the prerogative of issuing the divorce is that of the husband. So now you can issue a divorce in one of two ways. You can issue it consummately. In other words, anti talikun, you are divorced. Or you can pin the divorce on an occurrence. That's also valid. Like the example we gave, if you exit from the house and then you are divorced. The husband really doesn't want his wife to exit the house. So he tells her that if you do exit the house as a deterrent, and then you are divorced. If she does exit the house, then the divorce will fall. Let's say you have a wife, and in the absence of the husband, the wife entertains strange men. By way of example, the husband wants her to not entertain strange men in his absence. So he says to her, that if you allow strange men into the house, then you are divorced. So he's pending the divorce on that. But what's his idea behind it? He wants to deter her from doing it. But the divorce will fall. The unique part about a pending divorce is that you can't retract it. Because you've pinned it now on a condition. So once you've articulated it and the condition is found, then the divorce. So if a person says to his wife, if you leave the house and then you are divorced, and then afterwards you can't say, I changed my mind. I revoked the condition. No, it stands. So therefore you must be very careful in general about divorce, and particularly when you pen the divorce, because once the condition is found, then the divorce will be enacted. No. The next issue we look at, and this is an important, I don't know in terms of your morning class if you come across this idea in terms of the book on sales. When you sell something, one of the conditions of the contracting party is that there must be a willing buyer and a willing seller. In other words, the buyer and seller must operate on their own free will. In South Africa, we had this issue about the redistribution of land. One of the problems with the redistribution of land is that the land is there, but you don't find willing sellers. You have to have a willing seller and a willing buyer. There are buyers, but there's no willing seller. And you can't coerce the person to sell something which rightfully belongs to him. So we've said a moment ago that the right of divorce is that of the husbands. So if the husband is coerced, somebody keeps a gun to his head and says to him, divorce your wife or otherwise, and then he divorces the wife. Yes, he did utter the wording. He did pull the trigger, so to say, but he was under duress, and therefore the divorce does not fall. So one of the conditions reads, وَمُكْرَهٍ فَلَا يَصِحُّ طَلَاقُ صَبِيٍّ وَمَجْنُونٍ وَمُكْرَهٍ. Therefore the divorce of a child, the divorce of an insane person, and the divorce of somebody under duress, somebody coerced, somebody forced, that divorce will not fall. Now, بِغَيْرِ حَقٍ. But the important part here would be بِغَيْرِ حَقٍ, without a valid right. Which means that if somebody is justifiably forced to issue a divorce, then that divorce is going to fall. So now you're probably thinking to yourself, mention a case where a husband is justifiably coerced, forced, placed under duress to divorce his wife. So we have a unique example. And this example is very interesting because it teaches us quite a bit in terms of Islamic law and the philosophy in terms of Islamic law. So the case we're looking at would be a case where a husband is justifiably forced to divorce his wife. The case reads as follows. إذا كان لديه 4 زوجات. The scenario is a person has 4 wives. Person has 4 wives. فطلق إحداهن قبل أن يقسم لها ليلتها. And then he divorces one of his wives before giving her her turn. So let's say I'm married to 4 wives. Say Amen, Bruce. So let's say I'm married to 4 wives and I divorce one wife. But prior to granting her a turn, so let's say my turns with my wives runs Monday with the one wife, Tuesday with the other wife, Wednesday with the other wife, and Thursday with the other wife. So if I started on Monday, it means now that I have to spend an evening with every wife. So I spent with the first one, I spent with the second one, I spent with the third one. Before Thursday came, so I owe my 4th wife a turn, don't I? I must spend an evening by her. But prior to that, I divorce her. You with me? So I divorced her while still owing her her turn. Not so. Okay? Then consequent to divorcing her, I marry another wife. So I still have 4. You with me? Then my 4th wife goes to the MJC, Muslim Judicial Council. And she petitions that my husband divorced me whilst not granting me my turn. So is it possible for me to have a turn with her while she's not my wife? No. So I'll be summoned to court And then the judge will tell me to divorce my wife, the fourth wife I married now, in order for me to remarry my fourth wife, in order for me to give her a turn. You with me? Everybody understand? Must I go through the scenario again? Okay, you understand? So when I thought of this particular scenario, what does it speak about? Because look, I had 4 wives. I divorced my fourth wife without giving her a turn. In order to give her her right, her turn, I will be coerced to divorce the fourth one I married, remarry her again, and give her a turn. And thereafter, if I want to divorce her again, then I can divorce her. What does it talk about? What does it impress upon you? It impresses upon you the rights of your fellow human being. Like, for example, if you're married to 4 wives, you must fulfill the rights. And look at the extent to which the Sharia will go to ensure that your fellow human being gets their rights. You follow? It seems like very elaborate, but the reason why it's elaborate because of the importance that the Sharia attaches to the rights of others, and therefore we should not think lightly of the rights of others. There's a scroll on the Day of Judgment that Allah SWT has a hands-off approach with. What is that scroll? That is the scroll that contain violations of one against the other. The other scroll is that if you didn't fast, that scroll is with Allah. If you didn't pray, if you didn't perform your pilgrimage, if you didn't pay your zakah, those scrolls are with Allah. And if Allah wishes to, Allah SWT can wipe it clean. But the other scroll, Allah has a hands-off approach. The forgiveness of Allah SWT is pending on the forgiveness of the fellow creation. So it's very important for us to be conscious of the rights, and we shouldn't ever find ourselves in a situation whereby we are guilty of transgressing the rights of others. No. And for our spiritual progress, particularly of the fact that we in i'tikaf, allow me to suggest that if you cannot gain spiritual progress if you are hampered by outstanding rights that you owe to others. And whilst you're in i'tikaf, if you come to the realization that there's an outstanding right, a valid outstanding right, that somebody has against you, then it is better for you to fulfill that right of that person than spending time in i'tikaf. Very important. When normally, even, and particularly whilst you're in i'tikaf now, the ideal situation of a believer is that when he goes to sleep at night, he goes to sleep in the comfort that he has fulfilled all the commandments of Allah to the best of his ability. He stayed away from the prohibitions of Allah SWT, and he doesn't have any outstanding rights due to anybody. He makes an effort. And you might not be able to resolve everything by this evening, but an effort should be made to free yourself of any obligation that you may have towards anybody else. That would include, that would be almost like right on top. Now, that would be an example now of something that you may not be able to resolve immediately. It may be, a colossal amount of money, but you can certainly take a step in terms of resolving it. One step might be you contact the person. Assalamu alaikum. I'm actually conscious that I owe you that amount of money, and I have made a resolve that I'm going to repay you. And this is my payment plan, whatever the case may be. Or I don't have a payment plan because I'm just not in a position to, but I'm conscious of it. And I'm praying that Allah SWT will facilitate that I'm able to fulfill that right. So in other words, it must be addressed and not, put out there. And the nature of certain other debt would be that it's, house debt, car debt, and so forth. It's a mode of financing, unfortunately, in today's time. And that's something that you can resolve, but the intention should be there. Yeah. So this is very, very important. And sometimes when we feel that we're doing, you feel almost like you're moving. You're exerting yourself, but you're not moving. So like on a treadmill, you're making effort, you're breaking a sweat, but you're not going anywhere. Sometimes our spirituality feels like that. Why is that? Because we are we are held back, encumbered with obligations of others upon us. May Allah grant us the tawfiq. No. So this is the first example. And other examples are given as well, but we won't go into those examples. Bi-idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think the one suffices you. Bi-idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No. مثل أن هدد بقتل سواء كان التهديد بقتل أو بقتل أصلي أو فرعي. So now, when are you considered to be under coercion? And this is an important legal concept. You know, when can you lay a claim? Like a husband says, look, I divorced my wife, yes, but I was under duress. So when can a person be considered to be under duress? Because if he was really under duress, then the divorce doesn't fall. So when is he considered to be under duress? So the text says, مثل أن هدد بقتل. He is threatened with killing. So you know the example we gave, I hold a gun to your head. If you don't divorce your wife, then I'm going to shoot you. So is he under duress? Clearly. No. سواء كان التهديد بقتل أو بقتل أصل أو فرعه لا بقتل ابن العم ونحوه على الصحيح. So, you know, sometimes certain of the fiqh expressions we don't understand completely, but we'll mention it nevertheless. So what happens is a person holds a gun to your head and says, divorce your wife or I'm going to shoot you. Are you under duress to divorce your wife? Yes. The person holds a gun to your child's head. If you don't divorce your wife, I'm going to shoot your child. Are you considered under duress? Yes. If a person holds a gun to your father's head and says, if you don't divorce your wife, then I'm going to shoot your father, then also you're considered to be under duress. Right? But the text also goes on, and interestingly enough, and we must do some research on this one, they say if somebody threatens to kill your cousin, if you don't divorce your wife, then you're not considered under duress. Fiqh has a number of unintended, positive benefits, of reading through the text. No. أو قطع عضو أو ضرب مبرح. The person says, look, if you don't divorce your wife, then I'm going to chop your hand off. You also considered to be under duress. Because if you don't divorce your wife, your hand is going to be chopped off, and that is a clear loss, and you consider to be placed under duress. أو ضرب مبرح, or a person is considered ضرب مبرح. A person says, if you don't divorce your wife, I'm going to give you 6 of the best. ضرب مبرح, a hiding, but a severe hiding. And we colloquially we say 6 of the best. There was another word we used to use before. Falaka. A person says, now if you say falaka, then what comes to your mind? A solid hiding. So he's threatened with his life, cutting of a limb, or severe beating. That person is considered to be under duress. Now, وقيل يشترط في حصول الإكراه التخويف بالقتل فقط دون غير لحرمة النفس. وقيل التخويف بالقتل أو القطع أو الضرب المخوف لإفضائها إلى الهلاك. So some of the scholars say that it is stipulated, in order for a person to be considered under duress, it is stipulated that he must be threatened with killing only. In other words, only when you're threatened by death, then you are considered to be under duress. But that's an alternate view, which is a weak view. وقيل التخويف بالقتل أو القطع أو الضرب المخوف لإفضائها إلى الهلاك. نعم. وكذا يعد من الإكراه على المذهب شتم لوجيه من الناس أو ضرب يسير وهو من ذوي المروءات والأقدار لأنه يصير بذلك مكرها عرفا. We'll end on this particular point بإذن الله سبحانه وتعالى. Which is it's a unique point, and it gives us another insight into how Sharia views things. Sharia doesn't view things as one size fits all. And this is based on a narration of the Prophet ﷺ, reported on the authority of Aisha, if my memory serves me correctly. And the narration says, أنزلوا الناس منازلهم. أنزلوا الناس منازلهم. treat people according to their station. This so happened that one person came to Aisha radiallahu anha, and Aisha treated her or him in a particular way. Then another person came to Aisha radiallahu anha, and Aisha radiallahu anha treated him or her in a different way. So the observing companion said, why the discrimination between the one person and the other person? So then Aisha radiallahu anha said, I heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying that treat people according to their station. Different people are treated differently. The most honored by Allah is who? The most God conscious. So Allah, based on that, treats different people differently, based on virtue. So when we buy into a philosophy of equality, we undermine the framework of virtue. If everybody's equal, it means that despite the fact that you have a greater virtue than me, we must still be treated equal. And it can't be. So anzilun nas manajlahum. Different people are treated differently. That's an Islamic principle. No two people are treated the same. And therefore, fundamentally, we don't believe in a concept called equality. We believe in justice, yes, but we don't believe in equality. There are certain instances where the Sharia insists on equality. But by and large, the Sharia insists on justice as opposed to equality. Why I'm mentioning all of this as a preamble to the issue which is being stated now. You find a person of standing, a noble person. A person says to him that if you don't divorce your wife, then I'm going to swear you out in public. Now, is he under duress, yes or no? Nobody's threatening his life. Nobody's threatening to sever a limb of his limbs. Nobody's threatening to give him to subject him to a severe beating. He's being told that if you don't divorce your wife, I'm going to swear you in public. The Sharia says that if it's a person of nobility, then he's justified in divorcing his wife because that threat places him under duress. You follow? So the preamble, what I mentioned, was for you to explain this particular issue. That duress differs from person to person. If it's an average person, then the measures of duress are as we have mentioned. If it's a noble person, and then even threatening to swim in public, by way of example, would constitute coercion. And if he divorces his wife under those circumstances, the divorce does not fall. Why? Because he was under coercion, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So the scholars, mentioned that, and it also gave us the opportunity to understand the reasoning behind that particular ruling. So inshallah, we'll read a little bit of Sahih Muslim. If there are any questions, we'll take those questions first, inshallah, bi-idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And otherwise, we'll read through Sahih Muslim. Bismillah. From an Islamic perspective, if you look at nobility, for example, if you belong to the family of the Prophet ﷺ, then you have a degree of nobility. We amongst ourselves have different classes. And different families and different standards of living. So those would determine nobility. But nobility is by and large by lineage. We Muslims, so we don't sit much store, but just think about it universally. The current, it's no longer monarchy, but the British Empire is run by a king and queen or queen. So are they considered noble? They're considered noble. So nobility to a large degree comes from family. Yeah. And we have even in Cape Town, if you look at it, if you come from a certain family, it means you have a certain standing. And the standing of certain families is something which develops over time. And it's got to do with the old people before, when you came and you proposed, they would know what family are you from. So they would measure you by your family. No. Wallahu a'lam. So yesterday we had spoken about the narration of وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَكُمُ الْخَيْطُ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ مِنَ الْفَجْرِ. That is the Quranic verse. So some of the companions, one of the companions mentioned is Adi ibn Hatim. He understood the verse literally. So he thought it was a black thread and a white thread. And what he did was he placed it under his pillow. And then he would check every now and then. And at the point where he was able to distinguish between the black one and the white one, and then he stopped eating. But that's not the intent of the verse. The intent of the verse was the blackness of the night and the whiteness, in other words, the light of the day. That was when you see that the night is disappearing and the day has broken, and that's when you must stop eating. And then Imam Nawawi rahimahullah goes on now to explain this particular wording. And as opposed to yesterday, I think we read it a little bit fast, but we read our fiqh a bit slower. So I think inshallah in the same spirit, we'll read a bit slower without causing you to fall asleep or anything. Inshallah, we'll end off at half past. Bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we'll do about 5 minutes of the reading of Imam Nawawi's work. And then we'll read through some of the letters of Imam As-Sarindi. May Allah bless you and protect you and reward you greatly for sitting so diligently in a class of learning. Now, وأما معنى الحديث, so I'm backtracking just a little bit. فللعلماء فيه شروح. The ulama have different explanations for the hadith. And it's important for us to understand that, because people nowadays, they ask, but don't you follow the hadith? Or don't you follow the Quran? Absolutely, we follow Quran and we follow hadith. But the scholars, they differ in terms of their understanding of the Quran or hadith. So here's we have a narration in front of us, and we can clearly see that Imam Nawawi rahimahullah says that the scholars, they have different explanations of the hadith. So that's where things differ, in the understanding of it. Not in whether it's a proof or not. Everybody agrees that Quran is a proof and the way of the Prophet ﷺ is a proof. أحسنها كلام القاضي عياض. The best explanation, Imam Nawawi rahimahullah says, is the explanation provided by Qadi Iyad. How does that explanation read? It says, إنما أخذ العقالين وجعلهما تحت رأسه. He took 2 iqals. Are you familiar with the word iqal? Iqal. The word iqal, you can see there the root letters comes from aqala. Are you familiar with the word aqal? Aqal means intellect, right? The word iqal, I see the gentleman there is wearing a scarf on his head, the red one. Don't you maybe want to stand and show everybody? So we come a little bit to the front. So he's wearing a scarf. Now, the Arabs, they have this band, it's a black band. They place it on top of the scarf. Are you with me? That band which they place on top of the scarf is called an iqal. And the reason why it's called an iqal is because if you're out in the desert and the wind is blowing, you don't want the scarf to fall off from your head. So you take the iqal and you put it on your head. It keeps your scarf on your head. So the word iqal means to stop or to prevent, because it prevents your scarf from falling off. And then it is a multi-purpose, it's a multi-purpose accessory. So when they travel and put it on their head. Now when they come to, when they come to a standstill and the camels are now settling, they don't want the camels to run off. So what they do is they They take the same iqal, which was there to keep the scarf on the head. They take the same and they tie it around the feet of the camel, so it prevents the camel from moving off. That's also called iqal. So you see the common meaning of iqal is to stop. To stop. And the reason in Arabic why your intellect is referred to as aql is because it's meant to stop you from foolishness. You see that iqal, it prevents the scarf from flying. It prevents the camel from running. The aql which Allah SWT has endowed you, it's meant to prevent you from doing foolish things. That's why it's called aql. So coming back to the story, so Adi ibn Hatim, he takes the iqal and he has two. He has the white one and he has a black one. So what does he do? He places it under his pillow. Now, وتأول الآية لكوني سبق إلى فهمي أن المراد بها هذا. So he understood the verse to refer to the iqal, to the two, like threads if you wanted to, these two pieces of material. وكذا وقع لغيره ممن فعل فعله, and the same, like very literal understanding, if you wanted to, occurred to certain of the other companions. Some put the thread on the legs, and put it there, and every now and then they would check if they're able to discern between the two threads. Then they stopped eating. If not, it was still considered to be night and they would continue eating. حتى نزل قوله تعالى, until the verse of Allah SWT, an addition which is now served almost as an additional bayan. It should have been clear, but Allah makes it now more clearer and says that eat and drink until you're able to distinguish between the blackness and the whiteness of the day, min al-fajr, of daybreak. So now it's very apparent. Everybody can understand that Allah is not talking about the iqal which you put under your pillow or you tie into your leg, but rather daybreak. Now, فعلموا أن المراد به بياض النهار وسواد الليل وليس المراد أن هذا كان حكم الشرع أولا ثم نسخ بقوله تعالى من الفجر كما أشار إليه الطحاوي والداودي. Now, so when Allah SWT revealed min al-fajr, so everybody now understood that what is meant is daybreak, when you experience true dawn. Now, so we stop there, inshallah, in our reading of Sahih Muslim. And we continue tomorrow, inshallah, reading a little bit by little bit of these very valuable words of the scholars. And before I would rush through it, being quite apprehensive that, I give you the concept, but we are deprived by reading through the words of Imam Nawawi rahimahullah word for word and translating them. So rather we do less, but more meaningful and more profound, and we understand it and we gain from the blessings of Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So our last segment, inshallah, will basically be dealing with, continuing with reading some of the letters that Imam As-Sarhindi rahimahullah wrote to many of his disciples. Now, so he's going to explain now a very beautiful concept. من كتاب المختارات من مكتوبات الإمام الرباني السرهندي بقلم العلامة شيخ محمد أمين أر إلى أن قال. So this letter, we remind ourselves, is written to Muhammad Khalij Khan. And who recalls what we had spoken about yesterday? It's a very important concept. Talking about the spiritual aspirant, if you can use a neutral word. The word used in the text is Sufi. But as we mentioned yesterday, we're not preoccupied with terminology. Call a rose by any name and still smells sweet. And you and I, we should be spiritual aspirants. We want to become spiritually better. So in that way, we identify as Sufis because we want to improve ourselves. We want to rid ourselves of lesser qualities. We want to embellish ourselves with good qualities. Tafaddal. You recall what happened yesterday? I thought you were raising your hand to say what happened yesterday. No, I just gave a preamble. Bismillah. Jamil Jiddan. So the author starts off by saying, Al-mar'u ma'a man ahabba. That the person will be with whom he loves. Normally, when we look at this, we say you must love the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then you will be resurrected with him. That's what we normally say. Once one of the companions was, pouring water for the Prophet ﷺ, and then at the same time also the Prophet ﷺ felt, one of his teardrops fall on him, and he looked and he found that the companion was crying. So he says, "What causes you to cry?" He says, "O Prophet of Allah, in this world we enjoy your company, but after the day of resurrection, when those who enter into paradise will enter into paradise, you will be in the higher levels, and where will we be?" So the Prophet ﷺ said to him, "Al-mar'u ma'aman ahabba." Clearly the companion loved the Prophet ﷺ, so he will be with him because the person is with whom he loves. But yesterday we used it in a different context. Al-mar'u ma'aman ahabba. Fadal. So the first thing we said was, a person is with whom he loves. So if you love Allah, then you're going to be with Allah. So if you love Allah, you're going to be with Allah. And that introduced us to this concept of as-sufi ka'in ba'in. Ka'in, what does ka'in mean? Ka'in, you can understand, ka'in is with Allah. Ba'in, and is separate from the creation of Allah. Or you can understand that this ka'in apparently is with people like you are now with people, like we are now together. But in reality, he's separate from people. Why? Because his heart is always attached to Allah. So, these few words, if you really think about it and ponder about it, our i'tikaf should really focus on how can we reify this, how can we make this a reality. That ka'in ma'allah, that we are always with Allah. In other words, always conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or if you wanted to, we are apparently with creation, fulfilling their rights and living, we are social beings, but in reality we are separate from them. Why? Because our heart is connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he goes on to mention a very profound point. And he says that وَالْقَلْبُ لَا تَتَعَلَّقُ مَحَبَّتُهُ بِأَكْثَرَ مِنْ وَاحِدٍ. He says that the heart, the love of the heart cannot connect to more than one. In other words, the human heart is only able to love one thing. مَا جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِرَجِلٍ مِّن قَلْبَيْنِ فِي جَوْفِهِ. Allah talks about Allah didn't create two hearts within your bosom. You only have one heart. That heart, contrary to what we think, it cannot contain two loves. It can only contain one love. تمام؟ فما لم يزل التعلق الحب بذلك الواحد لم تتعلق بما سواه محبته. If you want to love another, in order to do that, you must first remove the love of the former in order to love the latter. It's not possible that your heart can have two loves in it. It's not possible. وما يرى من كثرة مراداتي وتعلق محبتي بالأشياء المتكثرة. But now what happens is, if you think about this practically, you're going to tell yourself, but this doesn't make sense. Because I love a lot of things. So for example, you say, like wealth, children, leadership, being praised, having a higher position, unique, وَالرَّفْعَةَ عِنْدَ النَّاسِ, you have a higher position in the estimation of people. فَثَمَّةَ أَيْضًا لَا يَكُونُ مَحْبُوبُ إِلَّا وَاحِدًا. The reality there is that in those instances too, it all comes down to one love. You say, I love wealth, I love children, I love leadership, I love to have a good reputation and good standing with people, and all of these different types of loves. That in reality comes down to one love. And Imam Sarindi explains that is the love of yourself. So it still comes down to one love. Why do you love your children? It's an extension of your love for yourself. Maybe this is not the best example, but I see some of the chairmen looking at me very intently. So maybe I can give the following example. A person loves his wife. Does he love his wife for his wife, or does he love his wife due to the extension of his love for himself? So my wife prepares my meals. I love her for preparing my meals. I actually love myself. Because myself love the meals. And because she's preparing the meals, therefore I love her. So loving her is the extension of loving myself, by way of example. You follow me? We early in the month of Ramadan, we read through this particular narration, and maybe I can give you the following to further facilitate understanding. Is everybody with me so far? Inshallah. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, حُبِّبَ إِلَيَّ الطِّيبُ وَالنِّسَاءُ وَجُعِلَتْ قُرَّةُ عَيْنِي فِي الصَّلَاةِ, was made beloved to me. He doesn't say I love. He says was made beloved to me. What was made beloved to me? Perfume. So you'd understand he loves perfume. You'd understand like that. So there's multiple loves happening now. Women folk. And the coolness of my eyes was kept in salah. What did the Prophet ﷺ say? I love, or it was made beloved to me. It was made beloved to me. Which means that the Prophet ﷺ only had one love. And he loved Allah. And by extension of his love for Allah, he loves perfume, women folk, and the coolness of his eyes was kept in salah. So he loved multiple things by extension of his love for Allah. And it's very different from loving something. We love things by extension of our love for ourselves. And that's the primary difference. We should love Allah and by extension love other things which Allah wants us to love. But we shouldn't be loving ourselves. As an extension of loving ourselves, we love other things. As long as it speaks to ourselves, and then we're going to love it, otherwise not. So at the end of the day, we spoke about the first step that you must take, and you must put it on your ego. When you put that on your ego, and then the second step is by Allah. So you must annihilate the ego. Here too, what must happen? The love that you have for yourself must be sacrificed. Because no two loves can enter into your heart. So you must take the love of yourself out of your heart and replace it with the love of Allah. And then whatever else you. When we break our, when many of us, if you think about it, you know, when I was very much younger, pumpkin is not a usul class. So just for purposes of explanation, let's call it a sunnah food. My mother used to call it a sunnah food. And I didn't really have an inclination for pumpkin. Then my mother said to me that it's a sunnah food, how can you not like it? So what is that? You must love the Prophet ﷺ, and by extension you love what he loved. So still one love. You love Allah and therefore you love the Rasul, and then you love what the Rasul loved. So that's an example. Many of us, we don't have much of an inclination, for example, to dates like that. But you've come to love dates in a quiet taste, maybe let's call it a quiet taste. But you've come to love it. So much that you can't do without. How did you come to love dates? You love Allah, you love His Rasul, and by extension of it, you now love dates. Otherwise, you didn't have dates. So you see how it comes down to one love. And that is the love of Allah. وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. They are fundamental when it comes to loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the love of the self must be taken out of the hearts, and the love of Allah must enter into the hearts. And then we find that there's more of an ecstasy when you love something and there's an extension of your love for yourself. Then that's an empty love. But when you love something by extension of your love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then there's meaning to that love. Even if it's something that actually satisfies yourself. Like the Prophet ﷺ, what does he say? حُبِّبَ إِلَيَّ الطِّيبُ وَالنِّسَاءُ. Women folk have been made beloved to me. As an object of desire, there's no doubt that women folk rank right on top as an object of desire. So the Prophet ﷺ loved them. But because his love for them was an extension of his love for Allah, then that love is sacred. But if that love is an extension of our base desires, then it's empty. And it doesn't have that wholesomeness that it would have had if you loved it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because, you know, you talk about unconditional love. When do you have unconditional love? Unconditional love is when you love something by extension of your love for Allah. That will be unconditional. Because no matter what changes, because you're loving for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you still love. You still care and you love according to how Allah wants you to love. So if you love because of yourself, that love may wane. First a few years of marriage, it's on a high, then afterwards it dips. But if you love out of extension of your love for Allah, you know that Allah wants you to love in a particular way. Mawaddatan wa rahmah. Allah wants you to have love, but Allah also wants that love to be balanced out by mercy. And what is mercy? Mercy is when that feeling of love is no more there, then the duty that you have towards your beloved, then that kicks in. May Allah grant us this, that we're able to experience these emotions, these human emotions, at a more profound level. And we can only experience it at this level when we have Allah in our hearts. So may Allah grant us His love, inshallah. And may Allah SWT enable us that we're able to remove the love of ourselves and replace it with His love and experience the ecstasy of loving by extension of His love. Because that is true love. That is deep love. That is profound love. That is meaningful love. That is unconditional love. Without that, you can't experience what love is. No. So to end of this particular idea, inshallah, بإذن الله سبحانه وتعالى. فإذا زالت محبة النفس زالت محبتهم بالتبعية أيضا، فلهذا قيل إن الحجاب بين العبد والرب هو نفس العبد لا العالم، فإن العالم في نفسه غير مراد للعبد حتى يكون حجابا، وإنما مراد العبد هو نفسه، فلا جرم يكون الحجاب هو العبد لا غير، فما لم يخلو العبد من مراد نفسه كلية لا يكون رب مراده ولا يسوى قلب محبته سبحانه وتعالى. Many times when we look at the barriers between ourselves and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yesterday we mentioned that the enemies that we have, which is your fellow creation, the world around you, the devil, and yourself. But the greatest barrier between yourself and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are not the three. The greatest barrier between a slave and his Lord is the slave himself. In other words, his love for himself. Once he removes that love for himself and he replaces it with the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, automatically when that void is created and you remove from your heart the love of yourself, and then now your heart is now free in order to become a reciprocal for the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah grant us all of that. وجزاكم الله خير الجزاء. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We'll bacha the dua inshallah بإذن الله سبحانه وتعالى. I'll just find it quickly on my phone, and then it's the dua that ends of the majlis. It's a very beautiful dua by Imam al-Haddad. If you have the dua, then otherwise if you know of any other beautiful supplication, then you can read it as well. No problem. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ربنا انفعنا بما علمتنا، رب علمنا الذي ينفعنا، رب فقهنا وفقه أهلنا وكرابات لنا في ديننا مع أهل الكتر أنثى وذكر، رب وفقنا وفقهم لما ترتضي قولا وفعلا كرما، وارزق الكل حلالا دائما وأخل أتقيا علما، نحظى بالخير ونكفى كل شر، ربنا وأصلح لنا كل الشؤون وأقر بالرضا منك العيون، واقض عنا ربنا كل الديون قبل أن تأتينا رسل منون، واغفر أستر أنت أكرما ستر، وصلاة الله تغشى المصطفى من إلى الحق دعانا والوفاء، بكتاب فيه للناس شفاء، وعلى الآل الكرام شرفاء، وعلى الصحب المصابيح الغرر، اللهم اهدنا بهداك واجعلنا ممن يسارع في رضاك،
ولا تولنا وليا سواك، ولا تجعلنا ممن خالف أمرك وعصاك، وحسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم.
وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله
وصحبه وسلم. يا ربنا اعترفنا بأننا اكترفنا وأننا أسرفنا على لظى أشرفنا، فتب علينا توبة تغسل كل حوبة، واستر لنا العورات وآمن الروعات، واغفر لوالدينا ربي ومولودينا والأهل والإخوان وسائر الخلان وكل ذي محبة أو جيرات أو صحبة والمسلمين أجمع. آمين ربي اسمع فضلا وجودا من لا باكتساب منا بالمصطفى الرسول نهضى
بكل سول
بالمصطفى الرسول نهضى بكل سول بالمصطفى الرسول نحظى بكل سول صلى وسلم ربي عليه عد الحب وآله وصحبه عداد طش السهب والحمد للإله في البدر والتناهي سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين في كل لحظة أبدا عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته
وإلى حضرة النبي
اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه.
الفاتحة.
بسم الله الرحمن
Jazakumullah khair and Allah bless you all. Really honored to sit in front of you like this and being able to conduct the class. Allah bless you and increase you in goodness, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.